now call this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Today is September 5th. It's 1 p.m. We're noticed until 2. And now, clerk, would you please take the roll?
Assemblymember Brawley. Here. Assemblymember Bronca.
Here.
Assembly Chair Constant.
Here.
Assemblymember Cross.
Here.
Assemblymember Johnson.
Here.
Assemblymember Martinez.
Present.
Assemblymember Myers.
Here.
Assemblymember Perez-Valdez.
Here.
Member Rivera.
Present.
Member Solt.
Here.
Assemblymember Bolland.
Here.
And Assembly Vice Chair Salazar.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, and to all the members, this late noticed, not late, but minimally, last minute notice meeting. I want to thank you all for making time to be here for a special meeting on a Tuesday after a holiday weekend. So, Mr. Myers, would you lead us in a pledge?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Alato, would you read the land acknowledgement?
The land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship in the lands we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Thank you. Before we take up the first item on the agenda, I'm going to turn to Ms. Salato. Ms. Salato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The item noticed and the accompanying resolution involves homelessness. As you all know, I'm the Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition in Homelessness, which holds a contract with the municipality for street outreach. And two of the locations identified in the resolution, Midtown and Downtown, which I believe refers to 3rd Avenue, the coalition is actively engaged in providing services. Thank you.
So it is the ruling of the chair at this time that you do have a conflict. All right, so next we will go ahead and take up the item of business on our agenda item for a resolution AR 2023-296, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly reappropriating $100,000 previously reappropriated from the Adult Shelter Navigation Center to the Anchorage Health Department, Anchorage Police Department, and Anchorage Parks and Recreation to assist with mitigation of large encampments. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Moved by Mr. Rivera, seconded by Mr. Wallen. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to make some comments and then I'll ask a question to the body. So as folks know, we are quickly approaching the start of emergency cold weather shelter, which the other resolution, which is going to be before us on September 12th, talks about it turning on by October 15th. And the plan, I think, is shaping up well for that. October 15th is about 40 days from now. I imagine for folks who are living or working near the camps and for the folks who reside in the camps, that probably feels like a lifetime. Now, I have heard loud and clear that people want something to be done at these large encampments. And while there's already some outreach and work by municipal departments being done, I also heard that that isn't enough. So this appropriation is looking at addressing two big issues, public health and safety. On the public safety end, it's really looking at it from a staffing standpoint, so providing overtime so our officers can spend more time in the encampments. Primarily thinking of the CAT team when I'm thinking of this, but really any APD resource would be helpful to improve public safety. I'm not necessarily thinking of a whole bunch of extra security contracts here, really thinking of sworn officers. In addition, I've heard that lighting is a huge issue, public safety-wise, for both law enforcement and the security on site, especially because it's getting darker for longer periods at night. And so addressing that lighting issue is important from a public safety perspective. On the public health end, this appropriation looks at ensuring we are providing some necessary services like water, restrooms, hand washing stations. I've heard necessary things like showers. I don't know how much we'll be able to get into all of that, but we need to address some of those issues as much as we can. And then additional cleaning, which primarily lies in the Parks and Rec area. In addition, I think one of the things that we can help out at the encampments is having an on-the-ground understanding of what the needs are at the camps and having someone really liaise to make that happen. So acting in that liaison capacity. I'm not talking about hiring an additional person, but using existing staffing resources with these funds. And we've seen some examples of that working fairly successful with this administration in the past, where they have someone really working as a community liaison to try to address some specific short-term issues. And I'm pretty sure that all of these things together are going to cost more than $100,000, but I want to encourage the municipal departments getting these funds, so that's the health department, the police department, and Parks and Rec, to coordinate and try to do as much as good as they can over the next 40 days. And then just a couple last things. One, just really quick, I put in there a reporting requirement. I don't think this is something that we should do frequently, but I know there was a lot of concern about how the $400,000 to help with mitigation at the Sullivan Arena was spent, or if it was spent, all of those questions. So hopefully this reporting requirement will provide some of that transparency and accountability that I know we are looking for and the public is looking for. Getting to the question that I alluded to earlier, so there's been some discussion very recently about the amount here. As I said earlier, $100,000 isn't going to go super far. It'll probably address some of the things that I talked about to some degree, but it won't address all of the things I talked about to the fullest degree. So there has been some question about, do we want to up that dollar amount? I guess the balancing of scales argument that I will make, and I'm not opposed to increasing it, is that this particular money, this $3.4 million, is something that on September 12th, we're looking at setting aside for emergency cold weather shelter or for housing. That's the resolution we're voting on September 12th. That's the framework that we're looking at for this $3.4 million. So the more that we take from it now, the less we'll be able to use it for those purposes in the future. But again, going back to what I began with, we've heard loud and clear that we need to do something about this situation. The resources that we currently are using to help out with mitigation at these large encampments isn't enough. So I'm open to the idea of increasing that dollar amount from $100,000 to some other reasonable number. And so I guess I'll just pose that to the body if anyone wants to discuss from that end. Thanks.
So, Ms. Bronner.
So, in my personal opinion, and I have spent a considerable amount of time in camps on my side of town, and it's just clearly a lack of enforcing what could be enforced. We can say that people must rest because of Martin versus Boise, but 25.70.060, I, driving motor vehicles in the park, J, camping, well, they're letting that happen, K, litter and waste, O, fires, Q, discharge of firearms, 24.70.070, damage to trees. It goes on and on. And I think the environmental effects of what's happening in Russian Jack Park, Chonsnu, those are the ones I know because they're close by, is not going to be easily mitigated because we've allowed it to get out of control.
So I have myself in the queue. I also would note that we have Ms. Johnson from the Health Department, Brandon from Parks, Deputy Chief Case from the Police Department, Manager Colles, and Municipal Attorney Hauser. I am an advocate for an increase of the amount of funding. I think that if the question is, we have a transition coming in which we need additional funds available for that transition, which might be around October 15th, maybe what we do if we do increase the amount available is we make the funds available for this short term and for the transitional period to the next phase. And what I mean by that is it's much easier to secure a site before it becomes utilized, which if that's non-congregate spaces, to ensure that people are getting to the non-congregate spaces and we aren't creating new, smaller versions of the same problem we're facing now while we secure this site. And while I appreciate there are camps across town, there's only one camp in which these dynamics happen to occur. Now, I recall in 2019 an incredible experience when the CAP team, working with the homeless coordinator, established for the first time, I think in the history of Anchorage, a 24-hour presence at the Beans Cafe, Brother Francis campus. And I've been involved in this conversation for a long time with my neighbors, trying to figure out what the answer is, especially when a neighborhood becomes the location for this worst case scenario, which we've got a long history of. We don't have a long history of success, we have a long history of these worst case scenarios landing in one neighborhood right there at 3rd Avenue. And so, but what happened at that time in 2019 was the CAP team secured the access, CAP team secured the egress, and they, for the first time, provided to me hope that a different future was possible. And the intent wasn't that CAP would be down there permanently, because it doesn't make sense. We're not gonna hire our police to be a private security for any piece of land. It doesn't work that way. But it did allow, in a targeted way, a chance to bring some order to a place that was inherently disordered. And I think there's no way you could characterize what's happening at 3rd Avenue as anything but inherently disordered. And so I believe a higher number might be in order, but I also want to hear from other members of the body on the discussion of this item. Mr. Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question first from Member Rivera. Appreciate you putting this together. And then a question maybe for Director Braniff. Member Rivera, so this appropriation of $100,000 coming from, I guess I'm trying to square this with the recent item that we declined to pass. Where is this money coming from?
Oh, yeah, thanks. So this money is specifically coming from the $3.4 million that's left over in the, what's the bucket called? It's the capital fund for the navigation center. And that's money that we know exists.
Okay. Thank you. A question for Director Braniff. So when we did the special appropriation for security, I guess actually maybe our meeting manager, Mr. Colhais, will want to speak to this as well. I'm so confused. The appropriation that we did for security and sanitation around the Sullivan Arena, AR 2022-361, the plan was to use $250,000 for special detail for APD, and then the remaining $150K to the Healthy Spaces team. I think I want to go to Director Braniff first, just to ask about some of the challenges, because I know you were able to spend part of that money, but maybe ran into some challenges with staffing. And I guess I just want to make sure if we make this appropriation, I think it's a really good idea, and perhaps to make it higher, that it will be implementable. So I guess the question that I would ask you is, how much of that previous appropriation was Parks and Rec able to spend, and what were some of the challenges that you ran into? Then after you answer that, I'd like to hear from Mr. Colhais. Just confirmation, number one, that full $250K portion was spent by APD. And I guess just get this on the record about how much of that appropriation is left unspent.
Mr. Banner.
Sure, thank you for the question. So our plan or strategy last year with $150,000 allocated to Healthy Spaces was to basically take the 9-member Healthy Spaces winter group and hire it up to, or staff it up to the 20-member level that it would ordinarily be in the summertime. And the challenge within our Healthy Spaces division is really, as well as every division we have, is just filling positions. And it's, in this labor market, we're all aware of it. We were not able to fill essentially 5 of the positions. So the group went up to 15, We billed 89,000 and change to I forget which AO number it was. Yeah, we billed 89,000 and change to it, and it was the intent to staff the group all the way up. Things feel the same this year as last year, and I think if we were to take the same approach, the wages essentially haven't changed, and I would expect the same result. So we would try and staff the group all the way, but we may come a bit short.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. And then maybe I'll go to Mr. Colhase and just recap my question. How much of that previous appropriation for Sullivan Arena remains unspent, and where is it?
Through the chair to Member Boland, I presume you're referring to the $250,000 on the APD side.
Well, yeah, yes, we just heard from Director Braniff, I guess how much of his was able to spend. So I think there's like maybe $60K somewhere that remains unspent if the $250K for APD was spent.
APD spent about $187,000, 102,000. To 127 and change, something like that unspent.
And then, are those funds then unspent, sitting somewhere, or where are they now?
I'm not the OMB director, but they're unspent, sitting somewhere else,
Okay,
I believe.
so I guess maybe I'll try to do some quick math, but knowing that, I would be interested in maybe amending this document to increase the amount. Thanks.
Doing the math here, so just tell me the number.
Okay.
Well, by the amount, I believe the difference that wasn't spent from the previous 400,000.
Okay.
I think, is that what you were behind? Okay, so we'll come up with that number.
So I think it's about 120,000.
So I have a number of people in the queue. Are you done for now? Yeah. All right, thank you. So next in the queue, I have Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. And my question is for Deputy Chief Case. And sorry to put you on the spot here. I will preface my question by saying, since there's a lot of notice here, if you don't already answer it, that's a perfectly acceptable answer. But we're all aware of the urgent public safety issues, both within the camps and in the surrounding communities. And Member Wrong, I think, spoke well on that issue. My question to you is, what is AP's bandwidth, right? We can appropriate funds, but funds are not the only resource that comes into play here. So, we have in here talking about, I think, $45,000 primarily for APD overtime, but you guys are short officers. You can only expect people to give so much. So, with your current staffing issues, how much can we appropriate and expect you guys to be able to deploy? We could say we're going to put $150,000 towards APD, putting for APD overtime, whatever else you guys think you need to actually kind of address the issues there. But how much of that do you think you'd actually realistically be able to utilize? What's fair to ask and expect of you guys with the current situation you're in?
Through the chair, Mr. Johnson, great question. I appreciate some of the comments that have been made so far about staffing and understanding that this is a temporary thing. Having 24/7 coverage of police presence in some of these camps is not sustainable. Right now, having overtime details just puts more stress on the officers that are already not filling shifts because this overtime drought that we've been in, or not overtime staffing drought that we've been in, has been continuing now for a couple of years. So I think we're all probably in agreement that this is a short-term thing, which is appreciated. With the 45,000, you're looking at about 6 hours of overtime a day. If it was on an overtime, sign up, like what we do with the Sullivan Arena. I don't think that's probably an effective way to spend the money. You're going to get different officers every day, every shift they sign up. So you're going to have, just by virtue of multiple officers coming and going, a level of investment that's needed over the next 40 days probably is not going to be what we want to make a significant impact. So we'd probably take a different approach. And we'd probably use that money to backfill, shift, call in and take officers off their shift and assign probably 4-ish officers to this detail, if you will, over the next 40 days. That would allow the same number of officers to work with a lot of the different groups that are coming and going in both inside and providing outreach as well as the members that are staying there. So,
One second, DC case. Somebody's on the phone with a child. Can you please mute the phone? Go ahead.
So, yeah, it would probably cost a little more than $45,000. You know, I'd have to think about exactly what we could spend, but I mean, it's gonna, you're talking, we're gonna end up calling in probably 20 hours of overtime every time we have this 4-person team out there absorbing the other. So, you know, if you calculate that out, you know, it's probably gonna be a little more than $45,000. Whether or not we're able to do 7-day coverage will be another challenge. You know, if we do appropriate a 4-person team, that's a 40-hour work week for the next 40 days, which means there'll be some uncovered time. I guess the question I would probably pose to someone or all is what's the goal besides the obvious of enforcing the laws and the expectation of the police department to come out?
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you for that, Deputy Chief. Let me ask you, as a follow-up, is Daddy, before officer detail, you said you think that maybe a little bit more than 45,000, but probably just the right order of magnitude. Does that seem like the right size? And again, if it's a question of like, let's just imagine hypothetically there was more money to that would deploy here, and it sounds like maybe the body's amenable to that, although we're not only talking about APD, but if there was more funding, I mean, what would feel like the both in terms of what's realistically achievable and also in terms of what's desirable to be impactful? What would seem right size to you in terms of personnel? And then I understand this is kind of cocktail napkin math here, but what would seem like the right number in terms of funding?
We're probably need about double that. If you want constant coverage for a full 40-day period, that's not a 6-hour-a-day overtime detail with multiple different officers.
So we're talking about 90, 100,000, is that the number that comes to mind? And
Yes.
do you think that if you had that funding available, you'd be able to find the officers to fulfill that?
As long as we're talking temporary basis, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next in the queue, I have Mr. Brisbane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really appreciate those who brought this forward. I think it's important. I am feeling like it feels a little backwards that we're going to you with money and then asking you what you can do with that money, as opposed to you coming to us saying we need more resources to address the situation we're in. So I think it feels a little backwards to me, and I guess I would just pose that question. You know, I think we're probably in general agreement that our current situation needs resolution in some way. But I'm curious, for those of you who are running these departments, what you need in order to address it. And so that's, I guess, my curiosity is it additional funding that you need? And if it is, how much do you need? And if you were to get the funding, what would you, as experts in your field, do with those resources to address the situation we're in? So I know we don't have time for all of that, but I guess that's my question is I haven't heard from you in terms of what you need to address this and what kind of resources are necessary to address it. And maybe those conversations already happened behind the scenes and came forward, and if they did, then great. Then if this was a result of a conversation that already happened and this was the funding that you needed, great. So but it just feels awkward when we're saying, you should try this, as opposed to you saying to us, here's what we should do. So maybe you could just address
Before the department directors go in, Mr. Rivera asked to put himself in the queue.
Sure,
And I know
that's
that's
great.
maybe backwards and out of order, but we're gonna go that
If
way.
these conversations already happened, I'm happy to hear that. I didn't hear that, so I'm just missing this.
Yeah, thanks. And you didn't miss it because I didn't include it in any of my comments. So yeah, so this appropriation really comes from the desire to do something at the camp. So what was that something? I talked to Chief Curl, who isn't here today, but talked to Chief Curl, talked to Mike Braniff, and then talked to Alexis Johnson about if we were to put forward an appropriation, and let's just say that appropriation was $100,000, what would you do with that money? And that's how this appropriation came to be. The dollar figure, the $100,000, it's really going back to what I said of the balancing of scales. We don't have unlimited funding. We have to look at funding for emergency cold weather shelter. So if we take a slice out of emergency cold weather shelter, I think that's okay to use it for the interim, for the short term. If we want to take a bigger slice, that's also okay. But yeah, that's how this resolution came to be.
Mr. Chair, can I follow up?
You have the floor.
So in those conversations, when the funding amounts were discussed, were there strategies for each of the departments and what they would do with that funding, so that that's already something that's been discussed, and so that you already kind of know what you're going to do with that funding once you receive it? Is that part of the conversation as well?
Yeah, so particularly with Parks and Rec and with APD, I got some really good tangibles, and then also with the health department. So that's largely what you heard me say in my comments earlier today, and then what you see in section 2 is of the resolution on page 2. I think is a good reflection of the conversations that I had with these departments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if any of you want to add to that, I'm happy to hear it. But is everyone in agreement that conversation already happened and you're all set? So okay.
I'm seeing for the record nodding heads from the administration.
Thanks.
No disagreement. If there are, speak now. So with that said, I also have Ms. Brawley in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'll also express, similar to what others have said, that, what's happening at the camps right now is not acceptable. Certainly, we don't want folks living in our city that way. And I think some of my questions were answered as far as appropriation of the funds and how you guys got there. I guess I'm just curious about kind of the policy decision around the APD. So I'm looking at the bottom of this resolution. It says AHD 27.5. APD 45,000, Parks and Rec 27.5 as well. I'm just wondering, what is the logic of that split? Because knowing the challenges of using all the funding, I want to make sure that we're balancing our kind of enforcement approach, and especially when thinking about sending uniformed officers into the camps. I know that can be a positive and a negative, right, for folks reacting to that. But also just wondering, how we make sure that we're balancing the public safety side and the public health side. Thanks. And maybe just to make that question more specific, is it just that APD is more resource intensive, or are there other ways that we could, for example, boost the health department funding?
I think,
It's Ms.
thank you for the question for saying.
And Mr. Brand, go ahead.
No, thank you. From the Parks and Rec perspective, that dollar total, the 27.5, in combination with some additional funding we have from not filling all of our summer positions this year, that would be adequate funding for us. However, I think we could meet the same goals if the 27.5 shrunk for the Parks and Rec allocation. So.
Or stay the same. Yeah, Ms. Johnson.
Through the chair, Ms. Raleigh. Yeah, I'm in the same boat as Director Braniff. We have resources right now for bathrooms, hand washing stations. All that is being coded to the health department. This 27.5, we would look at expanding outreach hours and then possibly going into emergency cold weather season, how we would work with transportation, kind of on the back end. It wouldn't be immediate for the health department because we are currently funded for showers or bathrooms and hand washing stations. Thanks.
Okay. Very good. So I have myself back in the queue. I think, Mr. Case, Deputy Chief, the goal, restoration of order. It's a disorderly environment, and it's outside of what any reasonable person would call a legitimate community space, for all of the things that are terrible about it. That's the goal. Now, I have had some conversations with the chief in particular about how APD is in a difficult position because you hear from both sides that, you should be out there to restore order, but also there are people who you make uncomfortable out there. And I haven't, from my perspective, and I probably believe a lot of people would join me in this, at this time we would prefer order on the balance of scales to chaos, and what that takes to get done I think is important. It has to be, of course, lawful, and you are all professionals, and I know this, and you'll do your mission with the utmost professionalism, but order is what we need beyond any other conversation that there is. So that's where I come from in the conversation and what is the goal. I also wonder what specifically would be funded by the health department if we had it. I heard that you would be preparing for the transition, some for the cold weather shelter, that you actually have money. I think if we were to take a poll of members of the public who are here, they would tell us in very specific detail what public health problems exist out there and what public safety problems exist out there. I think some conversation about secured access is important because that's what worked around Ian to Brother Francis in 2019, which is awful. But in some way of going through the camps, stopping the vehicles that are piling up and beginning the process of removing those vehicles from that place that are the third and fourth vehicle of an individual who's out there or not even out there, but is using it as a place to store vehicles, kind of getting that order in place. I think there are a lot of things that could be done. And so that's where I'm coming at this from. I've got your back. Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So based on Mr. Golan's line of inquiry, I have an amendment to make, and I did email the amendment to the clerk, but I'll walk everyone through it. So it's to increase the total amount here to $220,000. So apologies, but it's going to be page 1, line 2, to change. Well, line 1 and 2 to change $100,000 to $220,000. So spell it out, and then change the numbers in the parenthetical. And then on page 1, line 40, to do the same thing, change so lines 39 and 40, change $100,000 to $220,000, and change the parenthetical. Page 2, line 31. Essentially, I just kept the same proportions. So line 31, change that number to 60,500. Line 32, change that number to 99,000. And line 33, change that number to 60,500. And that should all square together.
So there is a motion to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Rivera, seconded by Member Vaughn. Do you wish to speak at all more to that, Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, just briefly, I want to agree with the comments that the chair made that I think, especially my constituents in Midtown, are talking to me continuously about some of the public health issues at the camp at the archive site, and particularly around restrooms, hand washing stations, those things. So hopefully, this additional infusion will allow the health department to do more with those issues. Also, the way this appropriation is built, it gives the departments flexibility to do what they think is best, given the goal here, which is to try to mitigate these issues and have a good transition or a successful transition between what's happening now and emergency cold weather shelter. Thank you.
Ms. Bronco?
Yeah, I'm hoping that with this additional police presence, that there could be, like Willowa Park is of known drug sales. Every time you pull in there, there's a drug deal going on. And maybe we can do some extra swoops through some of the parks on the other side of town as well.
Anyone else? So,
Mr. Cossack, Kevin Cross here on the phone.
yeah,
Been trying to get in the queue. Yeah, I would support the increase. I haven't been there as often as Karen or some of the other assembly members. I've only been down there 5 or 6 times. But the health issues that are created there is because it is a hotbed of criminal activity. And I support everything that you said, Mr. Constant. It's, what I've seen is unbearable, is unacceptable, and we need to show a strong that we support our law enforcement and that we support law and order. What is happening and the people that are being victimized down there should not be happening on our watch. And so I support this funding primarily to restore law and order because there is a criminal element that is feeding upon the unfortunate and the victims, and that is completely unacceptable. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. The last comment, just thank you, Mr. Cross, for your comment as well. I agree that with this funding, I agree with the increase in funding. I also was curious of the question with respect to who was asking for what and do we have an implementable plan. But I wanted to just put another point to this, which is a lot of what we are seeing is there's matter-of-factness to it. If you give up territory, others will take territory. If you have groups of vulnerable people, predators will see them and prey on them. And so while we're focusing on the immediate areas of incredible need, recognizing that clearing up one area will have a disbursement effect potentially across the community, and I just wanted to make sure that we are tracking with respect to the movements of some of the predators that we have, especially with that law enforcement component, very different than the humanitarian situation that we're trying to address as well, but that we are tracking as best as we can those movements to not allow the disbursement of the predators to prey on other areas where they see the heavy hand coming down in one area and move to another area. So I just wanted to highlight that there seems to be some inevitable recognition that may be in fact something that we should try. Thank you.
Is that good? Sufficient? Thank you. So, Mr. Holland.
Thanks, sorry, Mr. Chair. So I guess one thing I want to see comments on is so if we are choosing to increase this from the $3.4 million capital fund, that somehow we find a mechanism to put the delta from the city somewhere back into emergency winter shelter.
So I believe the sponsor and Ms. Varali have a specific item on the agenda for Tuesday that addresses most of those concerns. Am I correct in that assumption? So I'm seeing nodding heads. And so this is a two-part conversation. Today is an appropriation immediately to begin the process of fixing the disaster that's happening. And then on Tuesday, there was introduced already an item that we'll have for public hearing and be able to address. I think it was introduced already, right? Yeah. And so that conversation is for our next meeting. But it is a very, very important part of this conversation. And it's one that should be pretty interesting on Tuesday. So I would like to invite briefly the coalition to speak about their thoughts on this.
Hi, Meg Zalatel, Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition in Homelessness. When we start talking about adding law enforcement, usually our first knee-jerk reaction is, oh no, it's going to chill the response to our outreach efforts that we are contracted to do through the municipality. But we have been in contact with APD, and we actually think that there is a way to move forward here very collaboratively on getting assistance, because outreach.
Just 1 second. Somebody on the phone is unmuted and moving something around. Can you please mute? guess that's where we're gonna get, go ahead, Ms.
Yeah. So outreach can do outreach-based things, which is like safety. So we offer food, harm reduction, medical through Solomedics. We stay in contact with people. We build a trust relationship. But what we're hearing and what we're witnessing inside the camps are things beyond our control.
One more time, I'm sorry. Whomever is on the phone unmuted, we're gonna have to turn the phone off and start the call again if we can't get you to mute. Thank you, go ahead.
So we need that help as well. We have, particularly at 3rd Avenue, set up outside of the encampment itself. We feel like we're much in the same position as we were with Centennial Park, where it's not necessarily safe for our staff to go in. So we actually welcome the police presence and want to coordinate so that we have open lines of communication so that if there are homelessness related issues, we can respond to those and police can be doing what police do best. So we think that this is actually an opportunity, and frankly, as I've heard many of you all say, something that happens when you gather a bunch of vulnerable people in one space. I think all we need to remember and recognize is people have encountered significant trauma, and we're going to be bringing extra resources to counterbalance some of these other approaches. We're going to be reaching out to our partners, crisis counselors, and really trying to be as holistic as possible, and also trying to find another opportunity in particular that we can go down to 3rd Avenue to support this effort.
Thank you. So we have Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And just remember, we have the amendment we're on still. And that's great if you want to talk to it. We still haven't dispatched.
I was going to follow up with a question to the chief with respect to the funding here and the difference between the immediate on-site response and investigatory response. Or is there any plan to coordinate, or are we coordinating, do we need resources for coordination with other law enforcement agencies, similar to what we've done a few years back where we kind of went into the investigatory mode to break up some of the organized elements of criminal activity, which seems like a different part of a potential response. Is that something that we're tracking at this point as well, or is that a different conversation that's happening somewhere else?
Through the chair, Mr. Martinez, we've talked about having a detective also assigned so that we have one point of contact with cases that are going to require follow-up work, as well as extra encouragement with prosecuting entities to make sure that those that need to be prosecuted are prosecuted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Others? Anyone? Okay, we have the amendment before us. There's no one else. Members may proceed to vote.
Assemblymember Brawley,
Yes.
Assemblymember Brownback,
Yes.
Chair Constant,
Yes.
Mr. Cross on the amendment,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Martinez,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Yes.
Mr. Presverdia,
Yes.
Mr. Rivera,
Yes.
Mr. Stoltz,
Yes.
Mr. Volland.
Yes.
Motion passes 11-0.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak to the main motion? So I don't see anyone. I just quickly want to say, Mr. Presverdia, I agree with your analysis that it feels backwards, and it continues to feel backwards, and it's a difficult position we continue to find ourselves in. We have established a policy. We have done an incredible amount of work to try to find solutions, and thank goodness for the departments that are being responsive, are here, and have been trying to make chart a course through the kind of backwardsness of the general response. It's not supposed to be the assembly is putting forward the proposal and then the administration is telling us, hey, we're gonna figure this out. It's supposed to be the administration understands the policy guidance of the assembly, the funding that's available, and then implements a plan to meet that. And we continue to find ourselves at a nexus where one branch points and says it's your fault. The other branch points and says, no, we've been doing our job. And so we continue to find ourselves in this backwards position. And it's very, very frustrating. Just like at our next meeting, when we take up the question of how to properly fund the mitigation efforts and the transition to the cold weather shelter plan, as we start to take the next steps towards ensuring that our vulnerable populations are housed within the means that we have and do the long-term work of advocating for additional funding, both state and federally. And so I just want to pay credence to the backwardness that you raised, Mr. President, because that is the heart of what we're facing right now. Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Assemblymember Bronca,
Yes.
Chair Constant,
Yes.
Assemblymember Cross,
Yes.
Assemblymember Johnson,
Yes.
Assemblymember Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblymember Myers,
Yes.
Assemblymember Perez-Revilla,
Yes.
Assemblymember Rivera,
Yes.
Assemblymember Stoltz,
Yes.
Assemblymember Vollen,
Yes.
Assemblymember Brawley.
Yes.
The motion passes 11-0.
I would just note also we had one member excused for conflict. So, with that, AR 2023-296 has passed on a vote of 11-0. Next, we have audience participation. We should set up a microphone somewhere.
Felix, you didn't get the clock. 161 million, take about $300 and buy
All
a
right.
clock.
Welcome. Please take your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Ronald Leva. I think you all got the email that I sent. We're here today. You earlier acknowledged the significance of the land we basically respect to the Dena'ina people. The old Native Hospital site is a sacred site, and it was blessed because people were born there, people died there. What you allow to happen is like taking the fecal material from Covey Park and dumping it on the totem poles in front of our courthouse. It's truly an insult to the indigenous people, and I want that noted in the record. I apologize for that, and believe me, I know what it is. Also, I sent you this, that the clock constrains my First Amendment rights of speech, and I petitioned the government for redress of grievances. No one has been affected more by the homeless problem than myself, my family, my business. And it's devastated me into now foreclosure, which you always put the money towards the homeless. What about the businesses that are affected? I don't have the generated funds to pay my taxes, so I want to forgive it. It would be fair. And you bargained to buy my property, you shorted me on the first sale to make it up on the second sale, and I'd like this whole assembly, if you want the tour of truth, what happened to that offer and what held it up and killed it was the assembly not giving me the Native Hospital to rent to do my final sale. But you allowed that to happen. And I'm sure you're not getting any rent except for the homeless person who closed the gate and charged $15 to come in. He was a true entrepreneur. But also, I don't think we should take this money and put our first responders in harm's way. They're family people, they have families, the police, the fire department, the medics, and Parks and Rec. They should be given a bonus to go into that hazmat, biohazard, dangerous location that even the head of the coalition wants police escorts. It's shameful. So $4 more an hour to everyone who steps foot in that war zone. And that would be fair compensation with proper training. Now, it's kind of sad that these headlines come out, that finally you're getting some truth. 10 city homeless camp near downtown Anchorage sees high crime rate, violence. It goes on and on. But the sadness was at Cuddy Park when she took that shopping cart and had at least 40 gallons of fecal material and dumped it. How do you think I feel cleaning that up on a daily basis and then disinfecting it and then get prosecuted and go to jail for it and fined? It's shameful.
Your time has expired.
Thank you. I'd like you to buy my property
Your time has expired, Mr. Levitt. Mr. Rivera.
and give those people the raise they deserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies, I forgot to make a motion. I move for immediate reconsideration of AR number 2023-296 and encourage a no vote.
Second.
A motion to reconsider has been made by Mr. Rivera and seconded by Member Vaughn. Any discussion? So just for members' awareness again, the new members, the purpose of the reconsideration vote and the no is that once it's been reconsidered or the question has, shall we reconsider this question, and a no vote has occurred, it allows for the immediate implementation of the project that's within the context of the item being proposed. And so it allows it to go immediately into effect. So the motion has been made to reconsider and seconded and has been urged a no vote. Any other discussion? Hearing and seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Assemblymember Cross on reconsideration.
Yes.
Assemblymember Johnson.
No.
Assemblymember Martinez.
No.
Assemblymember Myers.
No.
Assemblymember Perez Urdia.
No.
Assemblymember Rivera.
No.
Assemblymember Stoltz.
No.
Assemblymember Bolland.
No.
Assemblymember Brawley.
No.
Assemblymember Bronca.
No.
Chair Constant.
No.
On a vote of 10 to 1, reconsideration is failed.
All right, so the item has failed to be reconsideration to the departments. You have authorization to proceed as long as the executive agrees. With that said, we'll return now to audience participation. I understand we have a number of people on the phone. Ms. Hines will take one. Do you want to pick a number?
I don't
know. If anyone on the phone wish to testify audience participation. If you are and you want to, I think you hit *6 to unmute. Okay, so we'll consider folks on the phone having had an opportunity to participate. All right, 1 second, welcome. Please state your name, what part of town you're from. You will have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Gary Drake. I'm from North Anchorage. I applaud you guys putting this money into APD. I mean, that camp at 3rd Avenue is probably one of the most dangerous camps in town. But with all the camps I've walked through, over 200 of them to date, I've actually set foot in these camps. I've really tried to get the press to come out with me, but they tell me it's too dangerous. They don't come out. They won't come out. So I'm going to invite all of you to come out with me and take a walk. Actually look what's out there, see what's happening in the camps you're not talking about, the ones that aren't public. Yeah, was it Tuesday? You might know this officer. There was a knife attack just above the train station. I witnessed it. Police response was immediate. Thank you, sir. This goes on at camps all over town, not just the one you're talking about, not just the one above the train station, not out at North Park, Willow Walk Park. It's happening everywhere. So what I want you guys to do is to put more money into outreach. And the one thing I've not heard here at all, in all your meetings, what are we gonna do about treatment? Getting them housing doesn't help if they're not willing to take treatment and get right in their head. So I implore all you guys, come out and walk with me. Come see what it truly looks like. camps you're looking out, that you're looking at, even the, 4th and Denali, that's sanitized. So all I can implore you to do is come out and walk and put eyes on these camps that you're not looking at or you don't see. Things are scary out there. Needles, Narcan. In fact, thinking about it, I was looking at the KTU thing about kids and homelessness. I have seen so many kids in camps. Their parents are passed out, drunk, or with a needle in their arm, and the kids are running around with no supervision. What are we going to do about that? I mean, I'm to the point now where I don't know what else to do but to just beg you guys, put some money into this. Outreach, treatment. The people I've talked to, well over 500, most of them have never seen outreach. A lot of these places you wouldn't want to go. And you take any bike trail in Anchorage, and I'll point out camps to you, they're everywhere. They're filthy, they're dangerous, it's a biohazard. A lot of these camps are behind schools. There's one in your district, Mr. Martinez. I don't know about you, Felix. I'm not sure where you live anymore, but I'm sure there's one close to where you live too. This last week I saw a homeless camp starting to be built in the river, right by the Chugiak, over the Chugiak side, right on the bike trail. Some of you talked about having things being dispersed or wrong.
Right, that's your time.
My time is up.
Thank you.
Please come out and walk with me.
Come on.
What was his name?
I would just note for the record, before we move to the last participant, I think that's the last one we'll have time for, that we recorded Mr. Cross's vote as yes, he meant it to be a no. So just for the purposes of record keeping, that happened. And welcome, please state your name for the record and what part of town you're from. You'll have to.
Roger Ranson, I reside at Legal River District 2, long-time mental health advocate and involved in the camps. And I want to thank you guys for this appropriation. And I want to thank Deputy Chief and the administration for a sense of renewed collaboration, cooperation, and I want to thank the coalition themselves for the position that they're taking, that's welcoming this enforcement into the camps, which for the vast majority of folks who are homeless, most of them have not abdicated or not fully abdicated their morality, and they still struggle to be good citizens, to be good humans, and they're struggling in some very challenging conditions. And so I think this is this appropriation is a step in a very positive direction to bring folks back into working closely together. And yeah, I heard a reference earlier about Centennial and the challenges that the community had in there. And those challenges are overcomable, and they're overcomable by people paying attention to what's going on. So I appreciate Mr. Drake. I appreciate Mr. Leva and the folks downtown who are having challenges and reminding us that they're human beings too, that they need to have a safe place to live and operate, and they do. So as we move into this season that has some extreme challenges, and some of these folks that I've known and broke bread with and shared traumas with may not make it through this next season. But all of us together, with all of us together, we will overcome this, and we will do it as a group. We will do it as a community. We will do it as people who love one another. And thank you.
Right, if that's it, then we probably have time for one last person for 2 minutes if they want to speak. 1 minute. 1 minute. Go ahead, Ms. Crum. You have a minute before we automatically adjourn.
Rob Couples, 3rd Avenue Radicals, property owner from 3rd and Hyder to 3rd and Gamble. Thank you very much for this appropriation. It's been my position all summer long that the element that has been lacking is law enforcement. So I think I appreciate Mr. Johnson's comments about it's one thing to allocate money, it's another thing to be able to spend it. And so thank you for, the comments that you made, Deputy Chief, and really explaining how APD can actually respond. And I think that was helpful information for me, so thank you. One thing that I haven't heard, and I'm curious if it needed to factor into this conversation, was additional funding for code enforcement. And so I don't know if that falls, I know we've got Health Department, and Parks and Rec, and APD. What about code enforcement? It seems like there's a fourth element here that is maybe being overlooked. And so I would pose that question to the body, if you've considered there needing to be additional funding for code enforcement activities at the site. So I'll just leave you with that comment. Thanks again for this appropriation. I'm hopeful that in the very near future, I'll start to see and feel a difference from this action. Thank you.
Thank you, and with that, we are adjourned.